encouragement, link up when you have a chance with Maya or me on LinkedIn or on Facebook. The Prime Minister is coming back. He came back yesterday from 10 days travel. He was on a real whirlwind trip. He did the G20 in Cambodia. He did the larger economic group in Bali. He met with the president of China, Xi. He met with President Biden. He was on a real diplomatic push to achieve a lot of things that he can't achieve at home. When he left, he had just terminated one of his cabinet ministers. So that's the second one to fall. Mr. Yamagiwa was the first. He was the Minister of Economic Revitalization. That happened about 3 weeks ago. And then the Minister of Justice resigned on the day that the Prime Minister said in the morning he's going to keep him, he's going to move forward. The cabinet is stable, the cabinet is moving forward. We are dedicated to solving the issues that are confronting Japan. And then that evening, the Justice Minister resigned. The day before the Prime Minister left on Friday, 2 weeks ago, or I guess it was 2 weeks ago, the Justice Minister, the gaffe that he had about, being Justice Minister is you're only in the news when you sign the death warrant of somebody. And in any event, you don't really generate lots of political funds when you're the Justice Minister. Those are just kind of off the cuff. He made those in a political briefing for one of his friends in the Kishida faction. And that just caused a lot of ire. Probably not enough to crucify him, but it indicates that the knives are out for the Prime Minister. The opposition feels emboldened. The Prime Minister has had a really tough time in this 90-day session that we are in right now. It's an extraordinary diet session. It is scheduled to end on December 10th. Today's the 20th. That's maybe 15 days away, 20 days away. They want to pass 60 bills. It's just not going to happen. The proceedings inside the Diet have been hampered and retarded because of the opposition demanding from the Prime Minister, what in the hell are you doing about the Unification Church and its incestuous fingers all throughout the Liberal Democratic Party, and the many, many years of them giving you money and you looking this, sideways when people have been buying these vases and these trophies with enormous amounts of money because they are imbued with some sort of spiritual essence that is going to save you and your family for eternity. This is a tactic that is used frequently because it is a tax acknowledged way of collecting money, and they just ramped it up to the hilt. Other religious organizations do that as well. It is a proven and tried method of collecting funds. So the Prime Minister was held really to court on that. What are you going to do about helping the victims, doing reparations for those people who have whose mother or grandfather has dedicated their family heirlooms, to this religious organization? And it's not really religious, it's kind of a cult. So a lot of opposition there. The second thing that has been hammering the Prime Minister and holding up Diet proceedings was the inclusion of several members of his cabinet who have ties to the Unification Church. 400 days he's been Prime Minister. He's passed that mark just last week. He had the upper house election and then shifted his cabinet. He changed some of the members because of the Unification Church scandal. And he said that I'm going to have this cabinet free of Unification Church ties. That didn't last very long because one after another, starting with Mr. Yamagiwa, but also going with several people who are influential, not just in the cabinet, but also in the LDP hierarchy, who came into that position as a consequence of the election of the House of Councillors and Mr. Kishida becoming Prime Minister about 6 months before that. So the the prime minister has been hammered by the opposition, and as a consequence, he has done some things. He has passed the supplemental budget, the second supplemental budget for this year, because of COVID, because of the explosive decline of the yen. So he has been successful in certain areas, but he has this aura, this personality about him that he really is hesitant to take very drastic action. Kento Chu, I'm going to think about it. That's a good proposal. Let me think about it. Or alternatively, he speaks very expansively on the new economy. We're going to have this new form of capitalism without too many details. And still, even now, we haven't seen much progress on those fronts. So those two personality traits kind of hamper him. But in the meantime, the opposition has smelled blood, and they are just hammering him. And they have said to the administration, we are not going to move, we're not going to be voting, we're not going to be participating until you solve these issues, until you respond about what you're doing about the Unification Church and how you're going to change the law so that the Unification Church can be punished. They have made some progress there, but unfortunately, the GG poll just this last week puts the Prime Minister's approval rating back down to 27%. So he was at about 32% at the last meeting. At the last poll. So the polls are going to start coming out again. They're always run on a monthly basis. Gigi came out and put the Prime Minister's approval rating at 27%. That is a dangerous area. Anytime a Prime Minister has under a 30% approval rating, it's kind of a panic button for him. So the Prime Minister is looking for ways to shore that up. He came up with a proposal from the cabinet to punish the Unification Church, to give a path of repatriations for the victims. A lot of things have come out as a consequence of that. For that example, Unification Church members adopting kids or giving kids up for adoption. These things keep just snowballing. It just will never end. And then there's also the second generation kids who were born as a consequence of Unification Church arranged marriages or marriages that were put together as a result of the membership into the Unification Church. They had children, and their children have been raised, and now they're 20, 30, 40 years old. They have their own complaints. They have their own, psychological issues with the way they were raised with their parents, and they're speaking out on that too. So there's a lot there. So frequently when a leader of a country is embroiled in internal issues, they go outside. They go outside the country to kind of shore up their issues. And this was an attractive option for Mr. Kishida because he was the longest serving foreign minister in post-war Japanese history. So that's one thing that he knows, he's good at, he is well practiced. And since he's now prime minister, he can parlay that. I guess you could say it's his best friend. It's his number two in his political faction, Mr. Hayashi, is the foreign minister. So that combination of the prime minister and the foreign minister, it's a really great combination for him to have. So he ramped it up, and he took 10 days off at a very, really precious time for him. 10 days ago, when this issue with the justice minister was just beginning to boil up. It was not a good time for him. It actually caused him to delay his departure, meaning that he got into his international conference a little bit late. So, with these kinds of very high-flying people, their schedules are very tightly controlled. As soon as he hits the tarmac, he's greeted. He goes to the airport. There are people there, members, heads of state who are waiting to thank him for Japan's, overseas economic investments, their ODA funds, to have contracts and that sort of thing to talk about. So a lot of those were pushed aside because of that tardiness in getting there. So he's receiving criticism for that. He just came back yesterday. He will be in the Diet tomorrow. So this will be a really important week for him. The things that he was really hoping to achieve in these two visits. He attended the G20 and then the Economic Council of the larger group of nations in Bali, was to promote himself as the leader of Japan, and to also talk about nuclear non-proliferation. He wanted to kind of point his finger at President Putin about how Japan is not going to tolerate any kind of threatened use of nuclear weapons. There's a lot going on there. He wanted to be known as a spokesman for that philosophy, for that theme, not nuclear non-proliferation, no use of nuclear weapons. I'm the Japanese prime minister. I came from Hiroshima. Hiroshima was the only city to have suffered, that sort of thing. That building on that theme, because he's got the G20 that he's hosting this April in Hiroshima. So one of the things when he had his talk with Mr. Joe Biden, the president of the United States, when he was in Bali, was the acknowledgement that Hiroshima, of course, we already knew that, but it was just something that was ticked off personally, one-on-one, for Hiroshima to be the host site, and for the president to join in that meeting. So that's a big deal for him. That's a feather in his cap. And being Hiroshima, being he is the prime minister, this theme about nuclear non-proliferation, he wants to build up into a crescendo in the G20. So he is the guy on stage. The whole country, all of the association of countries have gathered together here in my hometown, and everybody agrees nuclear non-proliferation, and Putin is a bad guy, and that sort of thing. Well, Mr. Putin decided not to show up. He sent his foreign minister instead. And at the time that he was going to make that presentation, that speech about nuclear non-proliferation, that was on Tuesday, and unfortunately that was the day that the Ukrainian missile fell into Poland, and it caused such a stir at the G20 that emergency meetings were called. Everybody thought it was a Russian missile. It took maybe a day and a half for them to figure that out. But in the meantime, people were thinking about that and not focused on the prime minister's speech. So I think it's too bad for him. All of the scores, the high points that he wanted to hit while he was on foreign soil and reported back to Japan, didn't really quite hit their mark. So he comes back to a Japan that is really kind of, at least the opposition party is sharpening their knives to kind of go at him again. So this next week will be really important for him. He's got a couple of issues that are confronting him that he didn't have when he left. For example, the reports of the third quarter from September to up to September, the reports now are that the economy shrank by 1.2%. It was predicted to grow by 1.2%, so that's a complete reversal there. The yen continues to fall. Inflation is now at about 3% for foodstuffs. Fuel is a little bit different because it's under a subsidy, but as a consequence of that, as a consequence of the Japanese government shoring up the falling yen, so they came in after 24 years of hands off, no intervention. They came in twice in the last 3 months to support the yen, to pump money in, to buy Japanese bonds, and to inflate the cost of yen, or the value of the yen a little bit. They invested a tremendous amount of money without much cooperation from any of the other countries. The United States didn't participate in that. So it was wholly orchestrated by the Bank of Japan and some of the insurance companies as a consequence of getting administrative guidance from the Japanese government. It had an impact, but I'm not so sure that it's a long-term impact. So he's got a lot of things going on with him. And let me see what else we've got with the prime minister. There is a third minister that is in trouble, Mr. Terada. He is the Internal Affairs and Communications Minister. Since the prime minister has left, that issue with him the issue is political funds and tax avoidance. This is the fellow who is supposed to be in charge of ethics within the LDP, how people are running their campaigns, and the issues that have been pointed out most harshly by opposition parties, but it was first reported in Bunshun. They've had 2 consecutive weeks on hammering Minister Terada. And it looks like, from what the prime minister said before he left for his return trip to Japan, was that he's considering asking him to leave the cabinet. I think it's inevitable that he does. That would be the 3rd minister in his cabinet to leave within 2 months. So it's beginning to crumble at the edges. It's a hard pill for him to swallow. When the prime minister puts his cabinet together, the strength of his administration really rides on that administration. He went in hard and he said nobody will have the Unification Church ties. That didn't turn out to be true. He said that this will be a unified and strong cabinet. It has turned out to be not quite that. The opposition has actually held up diet proceedings. He is in a bit of a weakened state. What he does with Minister Terada will be telling, but that's 3 of his chief cabinet ministers. And Terada is particularly close to the prime minister. He's also from Hiroshima. I believe he is also in the Kishida faction. So this is going to hurt him in several ways. And typically, in fact, there are news reports coming out, analysis. How much longer can Kishida stay as prime minister? Michael Bosaka wrote a great article in the Japan Times. I think it was on Wednesday, that was front page and kind of stated that claim. How much longer does he have? So when people are actually asking that question, it's got to be unsettling. And the way that the prime minister might likely be pushed out of office is generally through a no confidence motion, but the opposition parties don't have the vote to do that. So it would require somebody from the LDP to also vote with the opposition party and say, we don't have confidence in the prime minister. That is unlikely to happen. The most likely thing to happen is that the prime minister would close down the House of Representatives and go for an election. I don't think he can do that cleanly or in a way that would preserve his reputation, because it would be seen as a political ploy. People know that he's suffering a bit from the support ratings, from his approval, and the disapproval ratings are actually climbing up precipitously too, almost 50%, beyond 50% for him. The third way is for the LDP just to kind of backroom say, Mr. Prime Minister, it's just not quite working out. So why don't you just resign and we'll put somebody else in place. It'll be nice and smooth. We don't have to air the dirty laundry, and we can move on forward. The easy way for the Prime Minister to kind of jigger that, to kind of reinstall his standing, maybe, is to have another cabinet reshuffle. That seems to be a likely scenario. The problem is, the reason why he shuffled his cabinet the first time was to break away from any ties with the Unification Church. And if he reshuffles his cabinet, everybody said, no, I don't have any linkage with the Unification Church. Please just elect me or appoint me as a minister. I'll be good for you. That didn't turn out to be 100% accurate. He runs into the same thing if he shuffles the cabinet again. People will say, I have no ties. I signed the document that was circulated by Mr. Motegi. I'm clean. Please make me minister for the next administration. That's a dangerous path to run too. Probably his go-to, given that it's him and what we know about his proclivities, probably he's just going to maintain the course. He's going to go forward. He's going to do what he can. He's going to give people money. He's going to continue to supplement the poor, less enfranchised people with kids, women that are pregnant, with supplemental income. He's going to bolster, the hospitals to deal with COVID. He's going to be very aggressive on dealing with that. He's got a supplemental budget. He's got lots of money to burn. But this till the end of this year, this diet session, a lot can happen. So please stay tuned. We'll continue to report on it. I want to get on to other issues too. He met with South Korea's President Yoon while he was in the G20. Apparently they came together. It was the first time for them to actually meet face to face. It was a little bit touch and go. Are they going to meet? Are they not going to meet? Of course, the United States encourages them in the strongest possible terms to get together. The issue that they must resolve right now is the repatriation for the victims or the people who have gathered together to sue the Japanese government for wartime and colonialization injuries that they suffered. And in doing so, they took the assets of two companies, two large corporations that are in South Korea doing a lot of business, Mitsui and Mitsubishi. It seized their assets and it says it's going to sell those assets to pay these costs. The Supreme Court, it is now in the Supreme Court, it's gone through lower courts, and the Supreme Court of South Korea is holding that issue now, making a decision. And so if the decision comes that yes, those assets will be sold, the relationship between South Korea and Japan will go right back down into the toilet where it was for the last 12 years. So Mr. Yoon and Mr. Kishida met. They said one of the most important things that they talked about was, let's deal with this issue, this repatriation issue. We've already said that we were going to deal with it in years past. We signed an agreement where we said it's all done. We've finished it. We've made a payment. After less than 2 months, that money was returned. The Korean government said, we don't accept that. We don't accept, this portrayal of an apology. We want more. It should be more heartfelt. You should actually, apologize to these people for all of the horrendous things. And that just didn't happen. And so they've been in a stalemate for all of these years. Mr. Yoon is a little bit of a teetering president. He didn't win by a very large margin. And he's got lots of opposition against him. He said he would be tougher on North Korea. And I think that bodes in his favor. But being more friendly with Japan, I think there are a lot of people in Korea that are not so hot about that. You might remember that there was a fleet review 2 weeks ago in Sagami and Tokyo Bays. 41 warships from 11 countries gathered as a show of force, as to collaborate in exercises. South Korea did send a contingent as well. And this issue of the United States, Japan, South Korea being together, and the United States having this bold show of force and this unity of like-minded countries, not only upsets Korea, North Korea, but China as well. I mean, China is the main target for this kind of offensive, meaning the visuals and the press releases and the storyline of that. But North Korea also is watching this, and there are naval exercises and land exercises that are going on trilaterally between Japan, South Korea, and the United States. And this has upset our great leader in North Korea, and he just fired, I believe on Wednesday, another missile. This one was an ICBM, and he explained himself as, this is because you guys are rattling your sabers and being threatening to us, and I'm not going to take it. And if you keep doing it, I'm going to escalate even further. And so he played up on that threat, that promise, and he fired an ICBM on Wednesday. It might have been Tuesday, but in any event, this ICBM flew for almost an hour, a little bit more than an hour, and its trajectory took it high and over the island of Hokkaido, and it landed within 200 miles of Hokkaido, within Japan's exclusive economic zone. So this is yet another escalation, another kind of, you could say, misstep, but I think it's not a misstep. I think it's calculated to generate a response. This ICBM test, intercontinental ballistic missile, this test shows that North Korea can hit any place in continental United States. They flew it purposefully high, purposely long, purposely over Hokkaido to show to the United States, and probably mostly to the United States, that North Korean missiles can hit in the United States. In fact, they can hit anywhere in the United States, given this last test. So the tensions there continue to grow. The United States has said if they explode their seventh nuclear test, and we anticipate that at any time now. In fact, I thought maybe during the G20 they might do that, but instead they fired the ICBM. But if they do that, then they will station the Ronald Reagan fleet, the U.S. aircraft carrier, inside the Japan Sea. That's the sea that's between Korea and Japan. So that would be a big deal, and also viewed as potentially a great escalation. Defense for Japan continues to be an issue. The Constitution restricts Japan from having actually a military-industrial complex. They can't export arms, and they can't produce arms that have an offensive capability. They can produce, to their heart's desire, defensive capabilities. So mines, some missiles that are anti-missile missiles, tank destroyers, missiles that and shoulder-fired rockets that go against tanks can be perceived as defensive in nature. But the Japanese defense industry, they've decided that they're going to increase the budget 100% from 1% to 2% of GDP. And the way that they need to pay for that, the way that they're going to spend that, has really gotten a lot of people concerned, because that is a massive investment of funds. The Japanese Self-Defense Forces law is now going under review, and they're revising the distinction between offensive arms, so that if it is jointly produced, or if it is for a partner country, an ally of Japan, for their offensive capabilities or for their defensive capabilities, then it can be exported. So this idea of having one of the great reasons the United States is so powerful, because it has that military-industrial complex that just produces technology. It exercises, it tests in real time opportunities, because the United States is constantly at war. So they're testing these materials, and so they have a great depth there and a great hunger throughout the world for these kinds of military material. The Japanese need to develop that kind of capability too. They want to enhance the economy, and also to enhance different capabilities, cybersecurity, just the finer capabilities that that kind of a military-industrial complex allows. So they're revising the laws so that they can begin to produce these kinds of materials and these kinds of technologies. You might remember Rapidus, a new consortium for building chips that was started by Toyota, Sony, all of the Hitachi, all of the big companies. They poured in a lot of money. The Japanese government is going to supplement that too, for next generation chips. TSMC, which is in Taiwan, is the world's most advanced producer of these chips. They're building fabs and production facilities in Arizona and in Kumamoto now to kind of have that more resilient supply chain. And also, just in the event, I think I guess it's clever, it's smart in anticipating a potential move by China on Taiwan. I think what it says instead, that it is acknowledged to be inevitable. And so they're moving these resources as quickly as possible. And the Japanese government, under the economic security law, has decided that they need to, rather than import it from Taiwan, they need to redevelop the industry that Japan once was really strong at. The Japanese were masters at this 30 years ago, 20 years ago, and they let it go to Korea, to Taiwan, to other countries, and they focused on other things. They need to refocus on that. So they started this company, Rapidus. We talked about this last week, and the Japanese government is going to match funds in terms of subsidies and loans to this group so that Japan can come up to speed really quickly. Over the last week, it's become more clear that the United States, this is done in conjunction with the United States. It's a promise that the Prime Minister had when he went to Washington, D.C., maybe six months ago, to meet with Joe Biden. It is one of the components of strengthening the relationship between Japan and the United States, and also bolstering Japan's ability to support and defend itself, to have these fabs in Japan and to create this kind of technology and to enhance it. But it turns out that the United States, almost to a 10-to-1 ratio, is doing the same thing. So the effort of even these fabulous companies that have come together, they've pulled some resources, the money that they've pulled together and the amount of money that is being matched by the Japanese government pales in comparison to what the United States is doing. So a lot of people are thinking that this claim of being at the vanguard of the new chip development and to prepare for the future seems a little bit weak, a little bit timid. At the same time, the United States is ratcheting up regulations. The export control laws of the United States, they've always been in place. They're being ratcheted up to make sure that any product or device that is exported to China does not contain these advanced components. And they're very stringent. It is going to continue to be not almost like a sanction against China, because they want to retard their growth of their military complex there as well, and the miniaturization and also the drone technology. And what the United States is doing is they're pretty much browbeating and insisting that their allies follow the same law. And for Japan, that's a bitter pill to swallow, because the Japanese government, the Japanese economy produces these high-tech fab manufacturing processes, these special chemicals, these devices that make other devices, and having China cut off of that supply chain, out of that distribution relationship, is going to really hurt this part of the economy. So there's a lot of hemming and hawing. The Ministry of Economic Development and Industry and Development is considering how to apply that in a way that's not going to harm the economy with such a big hit. So there's a lot going on with the Prime Minister. There's a lot going on with the United Front to confront China and China's proposition of moving on Taiwan. It might have missed your attention, but Vice President Harris will be in Asia on Tuesday and Wednesday. Probably you didn't know that. She's being sent to Palawan. It is an island that belongs, in some regards, to the Philippines. She's not making an extended trip anywhere else, but she is going to stop in Taiwan on this trip to attend a conference. But it is significant that she's coming. Since Nancy Pelosi was here maybe 2 months ago, it's been very quiet on that front, but it did really anger the Chinese that she would come like that. And now we've got Secretary Kamala Harris, who is visiting. She's going to Palawan, which is one of the islands you might have remembered that was a huge battlefield during World War II. It is very close to the Spratly Islands. The Spratly Islands is where China has dumped lots of soil to create these artificial islands. They're almost aircraft carrier-like structures. And they've received a lot of criticism for that. The Chinese have said it's just for economic development, but it is also disputed territory that they are moving in on to move their economic exclusive zone further out. There's lots of oil and minerals in the seabed here. The area is, you know, very tense because it is claimed by Vietnam, Cambodia, the Philippines, Japan. There are lots of disputed areas there. And so as a flashpoint, these areas are likely to be, you know, used as pawns or as precursors to something else that's going on. So I think that's probably why the vice president is visiting. It's not received a whole lot of fanfare, but I think you're going to be hearing more about it once she's here, and especially once she's in Taiwan. So stay tuned for that, and we will keep an eye on it and report it to you next week as well. The upper house election was ruled on Friday by the Sendai Supreme Court as being unconstitutional. There were 16 lawsuits that were filed as a consequence of the last upper house election that said that the vote disparities between the big cities and the small cities is too great. And so they filed these lawsuits. And in 2019, there was an election that showed that the voting disparity between the people in the rural areas was 3 times more valuable, was carried 3 times more weight than the vote that was in the big cities in Sendai, Tokyo, Yokohama, Osaka, Fukuoka. And this vote disparity is seen as unconstitutional because one person, one vote. That's the way it's supposed to work. But with the demographic change that has gone on, you know, really rapidly over the last 20 years, but it's been going on for the last 40, is that the young kids don't want to stay where grandma and grandpa are. They don't want to work on the farm. They want to come into the city. They want to work at a desk. They want to ride the trains. They want to have, you know, a better life than, you know, work in the fields. So there's this huge outflow from the rural areas into the cities. It is a remarkable demographic change, and it's unlikely to slow down. The Japanese parliament has not addressed that by gerrymandering or by revising the number of seats in the parliament to these high populated areas that should have more representatives and take away a few of the representatives in some of the lower populated places like Akita. So that process is now starting. There is a strategy that has been agreed upon and that the Prime Minister is committed to carrying forward. It is called 10-10. We've talked about it a little bit here. That means 10 representatives in the rural areas will give up their seats, and 10 highly populated areas will gain 10 seats. And we kind of know who those populated areas are. And we understand that there are about 198 members of parliament who will be affected when they go through that process. But the point here is that of the 16 cases that were brought into the court system, 7 of them ruled that it was constitutional. These votes, the election poll for the upper house was constitutional, and 8 of them said that, echoing other cases, that it was in a state of unconstitutionality. They didn't say it's unconstitutional. They said it's in a state of unconstitutionality, because I think that if they had said that it was unconstitutional, then it really presents an issue for the Prime Minister and for the cabinet. The important thing about the last case that came out on Friday from Sendai, they said that the election results were unconstitutional. So that's a big deal, and I think we're going to see more and more movement on 10-10. And if you don't understand what 10-10 is, maybe send a message to Maya or a question, and we can talk about that more in the Q&A, or maybe I can focus a little bit and describe it in our next briefing. Finally, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Japanese economy and how much it is suffering. The economy continues to contract. consumer prices are rising. They haven't stopped. One of the things that the government did was they put the cost of telephone charges, which is a huge part of the economy. They reduced those prices, and immediately the consumer prices reflected that. And they took the price of cell phones off of this calculation about 5 months ago, and the economy did appear to be in a better position. That has now been mollified by other issues, and so the cost of consumer of the cell phones not being calculated has now kind of gone by the wayside, and the Japanese economy continues to suffer. They've exceeded 3%. Mr. Kuroda wanted the Japanese economy to be at about 2% inflation to preserve, the value of the yen and to preserve the economy and to have people, want to save money and to, purchase things, because prices are going to go higher. So you spend now because it's going to be more expensive in the future. He's overshot that. It's not his fault. It's not something he foresaw, that Ukraine would blow up and that the Japanese yen would tumble so low. But that's the other issue, is that the yen continues to hover around 150. That is a tremendous drain on foreign exchange reserves, and the amount of money that the Japanese need to pay for products, commodities, inputs to production that they must import. So that is pushing the economy down as well. As I said earlier, the economy was expected in the last quarter to have expanded 1.2% because of the supplemental budget, because of all of the things the Prime Minister was doing. In effect, it contracted 1.2%. So that's a complete flip there. We have the pandemic that is looking like it's going to be joined with an influenza, which always comes this time of the year. The hospitals are gearing up for that. And it looks like COVID is on the increase. We are at the 8th wave that was announced last week by the czar for COVID-related issues within the Japanese administration, Dr. Omi. And food prices continue to rise, and oil prices, even though they are supplemented by the Japanese government so that the consumers don't pay anymore, those prices continue to rise too. We've got one final thing, which is the influx of tourists. So I'm sure this hasn't escaped your attention. There are lots of foreigners. Yesterday was such a gorgeous day. I don't know what you were doing, Maya, but it was a beautiful day. A lot of people out on the streets. And boy, can you see visually the amount of foreigners that are here. And it's not just foreigners that have been here and who live here. I mean, these are people who are carrying backpacks and carrying cameras, so you can kind of tell that they're tourists. But the numbers have increased really dramatically. Taxis, hotels are having trouble because they don't have the staff on hand. The Prime Minister is hoping for this boost in the economy as a consequence of the foreigners coming in and buying all of these products and spending their money here. If COVID begins to take a more dour position and it chases away the tourists, that is going to really spell doom for the Prime Minister. He's going to have to deal with COVID. He's going to have to deal with the economy, the rising prices, and the falling yen. He's got a lot on his plate. We're going to continue to follow that. He's in a bit of a trouble now with his third minister. He will probably accept his resignation on Monday, which is tomorrow. Who knows what he's going to do with the rest of his cabinet, but we will continue to watch this and report this to you. Thank you so much for staying tuned. I apologize for going a little bit over, Maya. No, reporting once again from the Akalenga.
Yes, from Akarenga, I can see that the number of cars behind you actually increased. So, want to encourage everybody in the room, if you have a bit of time.
How about that?
Yes. If you have a bit of time today, join Timothy at Akarenga in Yokohama to enjoy these beautiful cars. And yes, that's very nice. Thank you for showing it. Well, if you are finished with the briefing at the moment, Yes, I can see that. Okay, that's very nice. So let's move to Clubhouse. Let's move to Clubhouse.
You only just barely tolerate me, Maya. It really
You
comes
think
out. You
so?
try and hide it, but it's pretty obvious.
Okay. Yes, but anyway, so let's move to Clubhouse and continue the questions and answers there. So there are quite a few people, and
Wonderful.
wonderful. Yes. Again, thank you for this. I'm going to discontinue the live stream, and I'll see
Thank you
you.
very much.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. See you next week.
See you.